And welcome to the Rollwise podcast, your show where we talk about things related to RPGs. This week, we wanted to talk about, I guess, an older video in terms of YouTube because it's been around for about a month. But Brent had found a video from Ginny D about a recent, or I guess maybe a recently released book in the grand scheme of things, that was about how to be a better DM and how to help make your players more proactive role players. The book is called something proactive, the Game Master's Handbook of Proactive Role Playing, and it was written by Jonah and Tristan Fischel. And it looks like it is for strategy. It's basically tagline is guidelines and strategies for running PC driven narratives in fifth edition adventures. So the reason why this book is an interesting book is because, as Ginny D had mentioned, is that really the DM in a lot of, speaking from D&D experience, has a lot of workload on their shoulders when they get into a game. So the question is that when the GM is doing all the work, does everyone have the same amount of fun? The question, and I don't think everyone can necessarily say yes to that answer, because there are DMs that have put together huge homebrew campaigns that hours and hours and hours or even years of their life that they spent on. And maybe some players just never felt, like they got into it or something like that. And so it could be a big letdown if you guys have mismatched priorities. So, with that being said, we're not going to watch the Ginny D video. We'll probably put a link into it so that people can kind of get her a high level overview of it, as well as we can put a link to the Proactive Role Players Guide if you want to go, or sorry, the Proactive Guide if you want to look at it on Amazon and see if that's the kind of book that you would want to get. We haven't read the book fully, but we are thinking that maybe if we wanted to do like a book review, what do you guys think?
Book reports.
Yeah, we can do book reports.
We're still doing book reports. Everybody in the comments, say if you want us to do book reports.
Would you like us?
Really, really out of malice or not? Like,
I think those would have to be.
I want to make these guys do book reports. God,
I need a 10-page single-spaced book report by the end of the week.
Yuck.
Those are words that give me hives, actually. But yeah, so and it's a long title. It's a super long title for a book.
It is. I mean,
it is. They were trying to communicate what they were trying to communicate, I guess. But it is a surprisingly long title.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I guess I think let's dive into a little bit of the meat for it, because I think Ginny D does a good job explaining like what is the purpose of this book and like why does it help? Because the problem it seems like they're trying to address is that most of the time there's a lot of extra work for the DM, especially when your players are kind of being reactive. It can get boring for the players if they really don't have quote unquote the agency. And that's part three, is that players just don't have the agency to really examine or interrogate the fiction of whatever the world that they live in is. And I think that this is, then we can start wherever you'd like on this, but the byproduct, they're really saying that the byproduct of this is because a lot of times when you're playing a D&D adventure, they're saying, oh, you're the good guys. Some bad person is doing something bad. So now you have to, you're caught flat-footed, but now you have to go and be good guys and do good people things and save the world or something.
Well, yeah, they talk about a lot about reactive storytelling versus proactive storytelling. I mean, that is the name of the book, so that was kind of a dumb statement. But I think really what it comes down to is a lot of times as a GM, you write a story and you have a story in mind, and you're kind of delivering that to your players. That isn't always the case, and especially like we talked about before the recording, a lot of other games kind of don't stray away from this. But I think a lot of times that's what it is the GM has a story and he's like, okay, there's a dragon, you have to stop it from attacking the town or whatever, and like that's where their story starts. And what this really wants people to do is the players take on some of that like GMing duty of being more involved in the story. And I think one of the things that I guess we'll get into this early. One of the things that I think is interesting is how presumptive it is to assume that all of your players want to do that, because there's definitely going to be players that don't want to. Like, it kind of feels to me like this sort of thing is written with the idea that all of the players want to kind of GM secretly. When the case a lot of times I think is sometimes it's just nice to have a story told to you that you're interacting with, as opposed to being 100% the driving force. Like, yes, you're going to think up character things that you include or goals that your character has and stuff like that. Just because I think of the growth of the character. I mean, even in like Dragonbane, which is a fairly close like OSR style game where we rolled the characters and the characters aren't supposed to be like super fleshed out. Like even now we're starting to develop personalities in our characters and goals that our characters have and everything. And like I think that's a natural progression. And so a lot of times I think like when a GM starts a story, it starts that way, but it evolves from there. And I think that's what makes campaigns compelling. I think if you want to start a campaign using this book, you should probably make sure all of your players have read it. Or you have a very
or at least
long
that synopsis we found on Reddit, because that's what I did. I wasn't gonna purchase the book nor try
I'm
to
reading
read
it. I
in a
have
day
it.
and a half. You have it. But throughout reading the whole synopsis, I was like, and through Ginny D's video as well, I was like, you need to have a good session zero. And this is something that I think that we've collectively harped on over and over. And we're not the only ones. There's plenty of people that are doing it, but setting expectations, finding out what the players want. Are you doing a series of one shots or a pre-canned adventure? Or are you starting a lengthy campaign where you want the players to be invested in those characters and to help have agency, some deterministic ability to plot out what they want to do on their journey from level 1 to level 5 or level 7 or 10 or whatever the heck it is.
Sure.
You know, because I think the longer you're going to be with those characters, the more a player wants to have some investment, some agency, and would flourish better under, proactive storytelling as opposed to reactive.
Well, there's one comment that I can say here that's probably the part that, at least because we haven't read the book, all of us at least. Brent has obviously started to read the book. If you guys start giving us a lot of likes and say, well, we want to see your book reviews, then sure, we'll get into the book a lot more, and we'll probably just read it. At least I will, because I think I can get it on Drive Through RPG now in digital copy. That you can say, hey, let's read through this, figure out what's going on. Because what it feels like has happened with this book is that it kind of eschews the idea that you should have a predetermined goal for the players to do. And at least based on what it seems like it's putting together, is that it's saying like, hey, your players need to have multiple goals. And coming from a corporate background, and these guys know that this is going to come up, is that it really, like, what you've asked your players to do is create a bunch of smart goals for their characters. And these are, and don't get me wrong, goals are really important regardless of the type of game you're playing. It's just that how much of the story they play is a different, like, that's where you're kind of parsing it. Like in this case, they want the goals to be front and center, and then you as the DM are going, okay, well, I've got 4 characters. This is their list of how many goals did they want to have, like
I
4
think
or 5.
three. Yeah,
It was like a lot. It was like a lot of goals, not just a small number of goals. It was a larger number of goals. They should have short term, middle, and long term goals. And of course, as these goals are met, they're supposed to be replaced. And this is just like real people. Like real people. When you achieve a goal, typically you move on to the next thing. You don't go, "Oh, my goal is to make $1 million. I made $1 million," and you just like disappear.
Now I can die. Now I can die happily. I'm going to lay down in bed and never get up again.
Okay, so you should take a step back and you should explain what SMART goals are first.
Yeah, so SMART goals are basically corpo speak for
one of these guys went to business school. That's all I'm saying.
Is that it's corporate speak for setting a specific goal that's measurable, attainable, it's relevant to the organization. In this case, the organization would probably be your player, character, party, or whatever. So you may not necessarily get that part.
Your
but then it's also
band of murder hobos.
Yeah, but then it's time bound. It's that, like, if you don't meet your goal, like, consequences ensue. And so, depending on the type of business that you've been part of, you may have a Like you may have a consequence, like you're fired because you don't meet your goal. I don't know if that's how that's supposed to be in this.
Oh man, that should be time bound in your game. It's like you are going to get killed by a dragon if you do not make this in 3 sessions.
So
my default short-term time-bound goal is always that I have to get the tax money to the county seat so that the orphanage doesn't get torn down.
Yeah, like those are good, but actually those are really examples that you could use for your characters to say like, my very edgelordy rogue actually still supports the orphanage in his spare time. So if I don't make the payment of 5 gold each month, then their property is whatever. Their title is stolen by the slumlords. I mean, those are things that like legitimately are goals, and your long-term goal is to actually buy the orphanage outright, or maybe, I don't know, deal with the slumlord. But the interesting part about setting goals like that is that if you have the players do that, you're not really putting a big bad in the situation. So I think these kind of goals would actually be harder if you were running a modular adventure, because you would have to tack on additional goals and gameplay and world.
This is not for a pre-written adventure. This is not for an adventure that somebody else has written. That is the deliver story format. That is story forward. That is that. Yeah. You're not doing a pre-written. This is for, I would say this is for your own campaign. And so you bring up another problem. Not a problem, but another thing that I think is funny is, as someone who's worked in the corporate environment before and has had at least one meeting every week where somebody is like, okay, what's your goal? Is it attainable? Is it this? Is that? And then coach me towards those goals. Like, to do that for a player character that's sort of an escapism thing sort of hurts me in a way sometimes.
You pull the character off to the side. Are you know, I just wanted to talk to you about meeting your goals away from the rest of the group.
Yeah.
You don't seem...
If you're the type of person that struggles with this, and there are people that struggle with like setting goals in their personal lives, like this could be really daunting. And that's one of those reasons why, like Jeff said, I think the session 0 is important, because there are going to be people that are like, oh God, goals. And then just my character jumps off a bridge. Like, they're just hard.
You have to have the right players, and you have to have the right GM. Like some people, and this is Jeff and his sweeping generalizations again, right? Probably newer GMs are going to struggle a little bit more with proactive storytelling. Some might have a natural gift for it, but they have to be more flexible, trying to incorporate some of those goals and still have some sort of an overarching plot that, you know, they're leading the players through, and the players are helping build the world.
But the point
I just don't think not everybody can do that.
Plot. Like, the overarching plot should emerge from the way that the goals are established.
Right. And I guess this brings up another question I have, and this might be addressed in the book. I will give it that, because I'm only like halfway through. But like, how do you keep people who have grossly separate goals potentially? How do you keep the party together then?
Yeah, that was going to be my question that I hoped was answered in the book, because the problem with having such specific goals, and this is something because you would have to have some sort of glue that kept everybody together to say like, okay, and this is why I think games that have like group goal establishing things are really important. Like, so when we played Fabula Ultima, for example, I thought that was important to talk about the type of group that we wanted to have. Right. Rebels, Chosen One. So, something that basically said, as a group, we all agree that this is the primary, the impetus as to why we're all going in the same direction.
But even then, the group, even that's what they suggest not doing, because again, that's a reactionary thing. Whereas like, this is what the group is, this is the problem, this is what they're doing, and this is how the group handles it. Versus like, what this is kind of asking is, we have 5 players. One of them wants to open a bar. One of them wants to own a theater. One of them wants to be a dock worker. Like, they all have these different ideas, and it's like, how are you going to make it not like, when that guy decides he wants to open his tavern, is it like, okay? I mean, I guess what you're planning is for this to happen way, way down the line. But like what? We had games where they've accidentally had a tavern, where they've accidentally come into ownership of a tavern. What happened in that game? It became Tavern Simulator 9000, where it was just like, we're serving drinks tonight. We can't go out and fight the goblins.
We can't save the world. We can serve drinks to the people that are going to save the world, but we are
So-
not able to save the world this evening or in the foreseeable future.
So I think that, to get to the original point about setting goals for the
Yeah.
players, I think setting goals for the players is really good. And I think as a GM, if you're setting out to do more of a sandbox type campaign where you want the players' goals to kind of drive the story rather than you do all the legwork to create a villain, or like say, okay, well, this is the campaign world. Okay, here's I have a big dragon on the hill. He's breathing fire. Okay, now create characters, and then one of them's like, well, I want to get that dragon. Okay, well, you have a goal that now intersects with a dragon. I think that maybe not be the way that this book wants you to approach that. I think if the players have a goal that involves a dragon, then yeah, sure, you get to introduce a dragon to your game. But I do find it's interesting because I feel like one of the things that when you look at this type of situation is that in terms of like the goal setting for the PCs, there's like a million ways to set goals for your PCs that can be very engaging, regardless of the type of, whether you're playing a module, whether you're playing a full blown campaign, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I do like the idea that they had for how to build NPCs within the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when they talked about faction design, how NPCs should interact, because this is where I was kind of curious, because I don't really understand how you as the GM have less work to do if you're the one that's designing all the factions and world in the background already, right? So like, I mean, if you're already using a pre-existing world like Forgotten Realms, then maybe that already exists. But I haven't looked at a Forgotten Realms book and really saw how how the factions aligned and all that stuff. I don't think they really gave you.
Well, I think part of it is, and again, I haven't read the whole book, but it seems like part of that would be given over to the player at that point. And that's the part that I'm concerned about, where it's like, okay, well, tell me about this, faction, or give me some ideas about this faction. Maybe not the whole thing, but they give you some ideas, because if it's going to be a faction that they're involved in, like, they're going to have to give you some information on what their idea is. Which we've all done in games before, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily. I mean, it does reduce some work in world building, maybe, but like it just puts it doesn't. I don't think it. If you decide to be the GM in a game, you are going to do most of the work and probably a lot of the work. I don't think there's any way to avoid it. There's things you can do to move around your responsibility of things that you're going to create, but I don't think you're going to do away with all of them. You're just going to make them different challenges. And kind of getting back to, and I also want to take a step back and say, I think this is a great idea, especially if you're running a longer campaign, or you want your characters to matter to the players. Like, these goals and stuff they're going to humanize your character. Because even as we were talking about, like earlier when we were talking about taxes and I have to pay for the orphanage and stuff like that, like, I think those made me think of like a character that would be interesting to play that did those things. But like, I'm just saying that it also makes the problem of that at some point as the GM, you have to remember that the game has to be fun for you too. So if you're not going to enjoy a game where 4 people have maybe disparate goals, and you're kind of trying to keep them together, you might want to be careful. Again, I guess that's what I remember. It needs to be fun for you too as the GM.
No, it does. And I think part of that session 0, like, especially if you come up with a goal that has you going all the way to the East Coast, and Mike comes up with a goal that immediately he needs to go to the South, maybe that's a time to go during session 0, like, hey, these appear to conflict. Is there a way that one of these could be a less pressing goal?
We can focus them together
to try to focus, and you have to switch around. I'm not saying that's perfect, and maybe somebody goes, oh, well, I kind of like Brent's idea better, so maybe I'll give mine up. Or maybe they present some sort of argument as to why there's, I don't know. Let the players make the case and let the players decide.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that from a sense of like, as a person who's run sandbox games that were fairly successful up to a point. Like, they were a lot of fun, and we had a lot of fun with the players making their own like agendas and things. It was a Shadowrun game where they made their own agendas. They decided what they were each doing on their own, but eventually it just became like, we've decided we're doing bad things for a living. And I was like, well, I'm not interested in running a game like that. Like, not Shadowrunner bad things, like drug dealer bad things. And I was like, I'm not interested in running a game like that, guys. So that was the other thing that I would remind people is remember that as much control as you're giving the players, you need to have fun as a GM too.
Yep.
And if you're not careful, you can let that get away from you.
Sure.
Well, and what's I think something that's kind of because it being a proactive player and having proactive or even emergent storytelling, it's something that I hear about and something that I see in games and everything like that. Because when somebody says, "Okay, I'm going to run the Curse of Strahd," I mean, everyone who's been through Curse of Strahd has experienced that story. I mean, now is there wild variations from Curse of Strahd? I mean, if you play the adventure as written, you're all going to have it's like a water slide, right? You're all going to have a certain you've all been to the same theme park. You've all experienced hopefully
it's gonna be similar. You may have
yeah,
skipped parts. Your
yeah, you
GM
may
may have
have
skipped parts,
a,
but
a slightly different
yeah,
a slightly different experience at the theme park,
The narrative might be different.
but everyone's been to the same Six Flags or whatever at this point, right? But like with this, I think if you're really looking at like I have proactive versus reactive players, because having reactive players that don't like do anything, it can be problematic for a DM, because
Mhm.
that's going to keep on shifting more and more and more work to the DM to always, as she said, and I think she has a valid critique. She always feels like she has to be generating the ideas for the
Yeah,
players to
that
do.
does happen. Yeah.
And that is like real easy from a GM perspective to burn out on. So it's like, well, how do you shift some of that work to them so that they are at least helping you kind of generate the ideas that are fun? And I think I think you have to look at, if you have a table and you're like, well, okay, this sounds like my table. All we do is go after the bad guy. We get the bad guy, and then we just basically reset, and it's like Groundhog Day for bad guys, right? Like, oh, next, who's the big bad this time? Okay, go get him. Charge the castle. I mean, if you feel like that's your game and you want to like change it, there's a lot of different things you can try to address. First of all, maybe you just need to change games, you know? And I hate to say this, because if you're a D&D like through and through lover,
Stalwart.
which is who this book is really designed for, you may this book is going to be a really good resource for you, because it's going to give you ideas on how to play D&D differently and maybe
Mhm.
more engaging. But for us, I feel like the biggest benefit we've had just from starting this podcast and kind of really pushing ourselves to get out of our comfort zone was the fact that we played different games that had these structures built into the game to say, this is how you can play this kind of engaging situation. And what's interesting is that, of course, as a game master, you can take those systems, and even if you use them on the back end for yourself,
Yep.
you can introduce those into other games that don't have that type of structure, and you can have a lot of fun. Like when we played Fabula Ultima, for example, that was a wholly alien experience for me, and how I set up the team and how the group came together. And we played it, on stream, and then of course on the home table. And so I feel like I'm better at that structure of game, but it basically says you as the GM are like reacting to what the players want to do. You're
Mhm.
really not supposed to give them you're not supposed to give them a X marks a spot on the map and go get it.
right.
You can say
Right.
like,
World building is by committee, not by
mhm.
just the GM, which would be totally different than a lot of
I would argue the world building is by fits and starts if we're the players.
well,
Well, it's an interesting concept, because
It is.
it basically put a lot of the reins in your hand. We developed threats together, and then we developed a lot of things. And so I was putting together, quote unquote, the pizza on the back end, so you had things that you could do while you were in that world. But I think that the area that we missed, based on my own reflection of it, was the fact that we never really hit your guys' original goal of being the rebels. We got stuck in escaping to be rebels phase.
We did. No, and I think we were some of our own worst enemies on that. But it happens. And
Mhm.
honestly, the first time you try something like that, if it goes successfly, more power to you. There's probably going to be some hiccups.
You're both right. We should have chained all those orphan kids to a rock somewhere and just left them.
Save the orphan kids. We got them out. That was the best thing that we did.
Stay here. We're going to be rebels, and just put them somewhere.
Our biggest failing was not coming up with a solid faction. That was our biggest problem. We weren't Robin Hood and his merry men. We weren't the Mighty Nine. We weren't Acquisitions Inc. We weren't Vox Machina. Right? We were four schlubs guiding.
Your legend
Orphans.
was unwritten.
Yes, our legend was unwritten.
We just took too much.
We did start to build it. We did do some heroic things.
We took a lot of personal responsibility for our charges. I think
we did.
Yeah, and that was fine. It seemed like the game really wasn't getting the direction that it was supposed to be. And I think it's also interesting because if we go back to another Call of Cthulhu or Delta, was it Delta Green? A Delta Green game that I attempted to introduce earlier. This one kind of had a little bit of a failure to launch because I was so hands off, hoping for that emergent gameplay that I was like, okay, guys, you've created some characters, now go make magic happen. And then
and we stumbled and bumbled and
everyone's like,
well, one of the problems with doing that in a modern game, and this is one of the reasons why Delta Green is nice, is because it does start reactive, where the agents are given a thing, you need to fix a thing. But then a lot of the unreactive stuff is like their home life and role playing the at-home scenes and stuff like that. And then how they handle being given another job that's probably going to drive them crazy. The problem with running a modern game where it's like, go do things, is like, we all know what that's like, right? Like, we all know what it is to get up and go to a job. And it's like, well, so when you're in a modern game and you're like, hey, just live your character's life. Like, most people aren't, like I said, this is the thing about adventurers that's funny in fantasy games, is like, in a modern game, most people aren't, oh, I'm gonna go fight some drug dealers. Like, most people don't do that. And we all know that because we all have a modern mindset. Whereas in like a fantasy game, it's like, I don't know, yeah, let's go kill the dragon. Like, that's what I always say is funny, is like, that's why most fantasy backgrounds are like, my family was killed by goblins and eaten by dragons and soiled on by ogres. Because, like, what psychosis does this person have to make them want to go out and fight things for a living and gather treasure? Like, I want to mug monsters in the forest for gold. Like, that's not a normal thought.
So what you're saying is that I'm going to clean up these streets, by myself mentality that modern players may get is not the normal mentality.
You have to have I think a group of players have to have that, which you are in the process of doing. I think that is something that you have to thrust upon in a modern setting. If you're like, make regular people, and this is an argument I've had with people before. They're like, well, I want to play a game where we play regular people. It's like, well, you don't, because regular people don't run towards the fire. They
hide under the bed.
Regular people run the other way. And so, like, when you say, like, when we all had little things, and you were doing a good job pushing us in that direction, it was just going to take longer than I think you thought, because, like I said, you don't have that we meet in a tavern moment in a modern game, because we all know, like, the three of us are friends. We've been friends for a long time. We're not going to go fight crime together, probably, unless one of us has a significant life-changing experience.
Sure.
And then can convince the other two people that this is the same thing too.
Well, but that's true. And I think that's the catalyst as to, storytelling. Like, you don't play the guy who's living the boring life that gets the Budweiser at the bar on Saturday nights. You play the guy who's had that tragedy in their life that forces their hand.
Yeah, or something is forced upon them. They have to do something, like the bikers showing up in the bowling alley in this case, like, or kidnapping someone. Like, there has to be something reactive, because in the modern world, you don't just react with violence usually.
Yeah,
because you get arrested.
But back to the point of the book. See, the book would have helped me understand how I could have engaged with you guys as players.
That's true.
So that
way to bring it back around. So
that you guys could have had encounters designed around your specific goals, and I could have had better intersections with that.
Right.
I mean, like I said, I think that there are some good things with how the
book is a good book. It is a good book.
Written.
It is. There's good information. But Mike missed an opportunity to say in chapter 5 on conflict.
When we do our book report, how about that, Jeff?
Okay.
But my point is that I think that it does carry some neat ideas that, if you haven't been exposed to them or you want to expand. I mean, it's always good to have different perspectives, right? Because if you really want to make yourself good at this hobby, you have to take in information from a lot of different sources, whether that be, I mean, I would love to say that all you need to do is read the DMG in Dungeons and Dragons, and then you become a good dungeon master. But I don't think I've ever seen any professional or any other person that I played with that said, all I did was read the DMG and I became good. they say things like,
I'm sure there's someone who said that.
Well, and then I guess the players experience a masterful GMing session.
I mean, there could be. There's a possibility that those people exist, but I don't think they're very common.
I think what they probably did is they read the DMG, they played games, found out if they had any interest in improving their own skill set, they found out what worked and what didn't work. They started doing this process internally to become better and better and better, and found out their own ways. So I think that introducing something like this just gives you another perspective that prevents you from having to trial and error your way to this type of approach over many sessions.
That's what I was going to say. It gives you a leg up on putting in reps, like just a bunch of reps about like where you run some bad games and you run some good games. This gives you some good places to start. Like I said, I think it's I think it's a good book, and I think it has good ideas. There's just some things that I could see being unintentional traps for people if you're not careful.
Oh, true.
Like I could very much see a person taking this knowledge and starting a game and then like not controlling it right, and then just hating running it, like just hating running it as a GM. Like I could see that happening.
Or feeling so obligated to have the PC goals be so like sacred in this entire thing that like it really limits what you can do as the DM. And so basically all of a sudden you're running 4 games at once because it's Brent's turn. And so what Brent's doing is he's obviously trying to take over the criminal underworld, using your character from Pathfinder as kind of an example, like establishing a thieves guild. And then we take Jeff's character, who's decided that he wants to climb the Tower of Sorcery.
Apples. He wanted to sell apples.
He wants to build a cidery, as a side hustle. Like I mean, all of a sudden you guys are off doing things, and it's like unless you can convince Jeff to come help you build a criminal undertaking, you guys are all of a sudden playing different games, and that I feel like that's where you could run into problems if you don't moderate yourself. And I think that's the point you're trying to make.
Yeah, there's definitely problems, and all of this information is out there. It's in other system books, but this allows you to buy one book to get some really good ideas if you want to be more proactive in your storytelling as a GM. Like, as GMing is hard for most people.
And there are management techniques that do work when you're running a table. I hate to say it, but there's definitely corporate training things that have worked to make me a better GM, because it really comes down to managing people.
Are you saying that people that the circle of people that have MBAs and GM, like the better GMs, are in the cross section of that Venn diagram?
I'm not in the cross section of that Venn diagram, so no, I'm not really saying that, but
you can still get your MBA, Brent. You can still get an MBA.
I could.
Good.
You can also pull all your fingernails out with pliers every night.
Exactly.
So I think that if you were looking at your table, this would be a really good book for people, for if you identify the problem that you're trying to solve. Because if you don't have a problem with your players and you just want to give them additional tools, this could be a good book to introduce to your table and say, hey, these are some additional ways that you as players can maybe improve your game. But if you have a very reactive table that they just kind of feel like conditioned to only react to what you put forward, I think you might want to do a little bit of probing to understand like why they're reactive, to see if this book is really going to help you get there. Because I think just setting goals may not necessarily be the fix all to making it.
No, but I mean, that's not all that's in the book. But any one thing is not the thing that fixes a table. It's like anything; it requires constant work and a lot of communication, which is again why session 0 is so important.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like this would be kind of like if you kind of run a light table where like there's table talk and people make jokes, and you're talking about doing funny stuff as a character that's not necessarily in character. Like if you go from running a game like that, and then all of a sudden you have a session 0 where you're like, we're going to play a serious game. I'd like you guys not to do as much table talk. I would like this to be character driven, narrative heavy, not funny game. Like you need to talk to your players, because that might not be the game that they want to play. They might want to be more beer and pretzels. We just come to hang out, roll dice, and have fun with your story, but also with just kind of having laughs and stuff like that. Like I think you need to set those and this is the same sort of thing. Like you need to have a conversation about where you want this game to go.
Yeah.
Because I just think just dropping this bomb on your players is probably going to not work at every table.
No.
No.
All right, guys, you guys are going to tell me a story now. And it's not fully that, but it kind of feels that way sometimes.
But I think that when you look at like, and it's interesting because people talk about like collaborative storytelling or emergent, gameplay as the way, I always like the definition that like, okay, well, you've got all these different systems and stuff like that, and so when you guys are putting it together, like that story that emerges from how you guys interacted to play. And honestly, Monster of the Week has been my number one like most influential game that I played for a change in mindset, just because it forced you to say, okay, we'll play to see what happens. Don't try to map out every little component of your game. Let the players make their moves, and then you go, okay, well, how does this change the narrative, and what do I do as the keeper?
But
So
that's still a reactive story setup. That's
well,
still a something happens.
mhm.
How do the how do the characters play to fix it?
Well, it's something happens, but it's like so. But it basically, and this is the kind of gameplay that I feel like I like the most, is that there is a monster of the week, and you know that there's this goal there. You're a badass monster hunter. But the point between here and there, I just say, okay, well, you're called because a person was brutally murdered in downtown. Okay, now what do you guys do?
But see, I get the point I'm trying to make is you can have player agency in a game that is reactive.
Oh, true.
And that's what I'm trying to say is like player agency is letting the players make decisions on where the adventure goes. It's not railroading them into something. And
Right.
I think that's the important distinction. If you never have your characters make goals, but you're setting up a story where they get to influence where the story goes,
Mhm.
you're giving your players agency. Like if your players can make choices, they have agency. Don't think that you need to do all of this to make your players have agency. Not having agency is you go up to the orc. He looks mean. Well, we want to talk to him. Nope, he looks too mean to talk to. He looks like you just have to fight him. Like that's removing player agency from your characters. Like
Right.
that's a simple example, but like that's bad. That's not what you want to do. You want to give your players. If your player says, "I want to try and talk to him," okay, what do you say? And go from there. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe they talk. Maybe they make the angry orc love them and follow them around the entire adventure.
Right.
If I'm running the game, that's what happens. And this is an orc I never planned anything for at all, ever. Anyways.
No, but I think a lot of games are going to benefit from having a mix of reactive and
100%.
proactive, right? It's I if you're 100% reactive, it's a railroad, right? You might as well just jump on, like you said, beer and pretzels, and there's nothing wrong with this. If that's what you want to
some
do
people want
after a hard week of work, is chuck dice and tell stories, and that's great. But sometimes all the way proactive gets a little,
I don't know if
wandering
anybody
off into the fields. I don't know if anybody's 100% proactive.
right. I don't know if anyone enjoys the 100% railroad either. Where, yep, you just go. Nothing that you do is going to change the story at all. Just buckle up.
I still like that Knights of the Dinner Table, that panel or that strip that they had. I don't remember which chapter it was, but basically, like BA was really upset with how they kept on going off on these weird side tangents and all that stuff. So he basically had created a map, and the map had like town, and then it had Wizard Tower, and then it had impenetrable forest north and south of it, and mountains that are behind the tower.
Exactly.
So they're like,
those mountains, that
forest.
forest looks suspicious. We should check it out.
Well, that's what happened. The players basically are like, you go into the forest.
You're obviously hiding something now.
Now, and they're like, well, we continue to go, and they continue to go, and they literally are trying to hack their way through this impenetrable forest. And then BA obviously goes to the bathroom, and then they're like, I would never suggest doing this, but I think we need to look at this map. And so they look at the map, and they get so mad obvious railroad, because it was literally just a straight line, like here, done. And they fought the railroad as hard as they possibly could. So
like that's the thing. Is like you definitely. I guess when you're reading, if you read this proactive GMing guide, words, lots of them. When you read the book, just like I said, just remember one. As the GM, you want to have fun, and if the players get out of hand and you're not having fun, just think about that. And two, agency isn't always them being able to go off and do whatever the hell they want all the time. Sometimes agency is them just making choices. One guy deciding to be a pub owner, one guy deciding he wants to be an opera singer, and the other one deciding he wants to philander. Isn't necessarily what they mean by making goals.
Yeah, it may not be the best campaign, right? Those may not be the best campaign goals.
So, needless to say, we have not read the book in full. This is a reaction to Ginny D's advertisement for it. It's not really an advertisement, but it was a very influential.
It's an introduction of the topics,
and it's an introduction to the topic. And I think we should probably talk about this type of thing more often from like a game series perspective, because I think that there's a lot of game mastery tools that transcend a specific system that I think are really interesting to talk about that you may not be aware of. And I think that how players set goals. I mean, if anybody wants to see an experiment that we tried with using knives, I think we have a fun video where we talk about how to give the GM knives. Not that it's a bad thing, but creating depth to characters and the type of things that can be used in a story.
He doesn't mean throwing knives at a dartboard or juggling them. He means plot hooks in your character's background as knives the GM can stab in your back later.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Just for the record, he's not suggesting you go out and do the thing from Aliens where you do the thing. That's not what he's suggesting.
Yeah. No, but it was an interesting conversation because there was a lot of different ways that people establish goals for characters, and I thought this was a neat one because it gives you people, but it doesn't give you things that you have to do. Like it gives you ideas as to like how the GM can integrate your character's backstory into the game and all that.
Yeah, no, it was neat. It was a good discussion.
It was a good discussion.
Michael put a link down below, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I got a lot of links coming into this.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of links. And I mean, my last thought on the book is I know that it says 5th edition in the subtitle or descriptive text. I think this book could be helpful for anybody running games that hasn't run a ton. I don't let that put you off. If you run 5th edition, great. If you don't, it's still going to help you. It's still going to give you ideas and thoughts, and that's part of your journey as a GM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, always read. If you're interested in GMing, whether you do it now, you're the forever GM, or you're thinking about GMing, reading as much as you can about it and kind of getting an idea of how you want to run your game and how you can interact with your players and see how they want to with your players and see how they want to run their game, and kind of melding those two together is really the important part. So that's my last thoughts on proactive role playing, and I spit a lot of them out. So
okay. Well, I think it's fun. So if you guys have read the book, let us know your thoughts. I mean, since we haven't necessarily dug into the book in depth yet, were we off? Did we misrepresent? Hopefully not. Was there a lot more information that you got from the book that you expected? Let us know. We're really curious as to, of course, your guys' experience when you run your games, how you play your games, where have you succeeded, where have you failed? Add it to the collective knowledge. Comment in the section down below. And Brent, I, or even possibly Jeff will jump in there and say a few words back to you. We're happy to have these conversations, so please jump in. So with that, Jeff, if they don't want to talk to us in the comment section, what can they do to reach us?
They can search for @Rollwise on Facebook, Threads, or Twitter, or they can email us rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and you'll continue the conversation in the comments with us, or email, or any of the ways that Jeff suggested. So please do that. We love talking about games. Thank you, everybody, again. As always, roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there.
Thanks.
See you guys.